What's up, everybody, and welcome in to another edition of the Sitdown. As always, if you enjoy this video, please make sure you hit that like button and let me know what you think of today's discussion in the comment section below. If you're new around here, you just haven't done it yet, or you're living under a rock and seeing this video for the first time, I don't know what you're waiting for. Hit that subscribe button below now so you never miss another Sitdown video. If you're listening to us currently on iTunes or Spotify, welcome in. Hope you enjoy the show as well. Make sure you leave us a 5-star rating and a detailed review. We always appreciate all the folks listening. Welcome in, everybody. I am your host, Jeff Nadu, and this is episode 165 of the Sitdown. Over the last several years here on YouTube, we have heard Joey Merlino tell various stories about his life connected to certain individuals in South Philadelphia. We have also heard him rail on people that have cooperated with the federal government, both people involved in his own case and people not involved with his case. We've heard him take to task people like John Rubio, Dominic Sacali, and Michael Franzese. Merlino, though, also delves in to another guy, a guy named Ralph Natale. Now, I have said on record, Ralph Natale is one of the most laughable people ever associated with the mafia. I'll just be honest. It's hard to tell when Ralph Natale is actually telling the truth. Joey Merlino has made it clear we can't believe Ralph Natale. I'll also tell you that Joey Merlino is a master manipulator, and he completely manipulated Natale into doing whatever he wanted. The story of Ralph Natale, his outlandish tales, and the manipulation that Joey Merlino made over Ralph Natale next on the Sitdown. Ralph Natale was born on March 6, 1935 in Philadelphia. He would grow up in South Philadelphia, not far from the Italian market. Now, according to Ralph Natale, he would say that his father, Michael Natale, was a street guy, and that his father, Michael, had a tough life. Ralph Natale would say that his father would essentially grow up an orphan from his 12th birthday on, and that he had to essentially care for his siblings due to the fact that Ralph's grandparents, Michael's parents, actually both died in the 1918 flu pandemic. So you'd say that Ralph, his father, had a tough upbringing, and in fact, down the road would become a tough guy himself. Ralph's father was in the bookmaking and numbers business as a Philly mob associate. And for Ralph Natale, he would say that his father was in and out of jail and that they had an up and down, prickly relationship, and his childhood was marred with a lot of good and bad. Now, in the late 40s, in and around 1949, at the age of 14, Ralph Natale was thrown out of South Philadelphia High School and he took to the streets. He would say by the early to mid 50s, he began stealing and fencing stolen goods. By 1955, Ralph Natale would marry a woman called Lucia, and they would eventually have 2 kids and move to Southwest Philadelphia. Now, down the road, Natale would have other children as well. Natale would say, though, that he essentially always wanted to be a gangster, but he would start his life as a bartender. That's really where he got into, I guess, meeting people. And he would eventually meet a person called Felix Skinny Razor DeTullio. Now, we have seen DeTullio mentioned many times. Obviously, Phil Leonetti's mentioned him, and that his uncle Nicky Scarfo came up around DeTullio. We also saw DeTullio immortalized on the big screen in The Irishman. He would be played by the terrific actor Bobby Cannavale. There's one thing we know about Skinny Razor. He was a very feared individual and was definitely an enforcer for the Philly mob. He also owned a bar called the Friendly Lounge, which was at 8th and Washington Avenues in Philadelphia. And this is where Natale got his start as a bartender. Now, I will throw this in. According to Joey Merlino, he would say that his father never heard of Ralph Natale and that he didn't know him when he was younger, which I find that hard to believe. But then again, it's really not that hard to believe due to the fact that Ralph Natale was significantly older than Joey Merlino and really his father as well. And that, which we'll find in this story, Natale did a lot of time in prison. And during the heyday of Nicky Scarfo, Chucky Merlino, Yogi Merlino, all those guys, Ralph was actually in prison. So it is possible that they never met each other, Joey's father and Ralph Natale. And again, it's whether or not you believe Joey Merlino or not of his father actually knowing Ralph Natale. So Natale was working as a bartender. He was working as a, according to him, protege of Skinny Razor. And Ralph Natale started getting involved with a bartenders union, Local 170, which was out of Philadelphia and also New Jersey. According to Natale, by the late 50s, he would meet Angelo Bruno and begin, quote, driving him around. Now, this is in stark contrast, though, to another point in which Natale has claimed that he didn't meet Angelo Bruno until the 60s. So, again, this is where we start to wonder about Ralph Natale's story. And I will tell you, up until now, I don't really foresee a reason as to why Ralph Natale would make up like getting thrown out of high school and things like that. I guess it is possible, but it really doesn't mean that much. We do have documentation to prove that he was a bartender. He did work out of the Friendly Lounge. He most likely very much did know Skinny Razor. And we do know that he likely knew Angelo Bruno. Did he drive him around in the 50s? I don't actually believe that, due to the fact that in 1955, Ralph Natale was 20 years old. He would claim that at that point, that's when he met Angelo Bruno and into the late 50s. Though, again, he would say at another point down the road that he didn't meet Angelo Bruno until the 60s. So we really don't know. Natale would say that when driving Angelo Bruno, he would regularly drive him to places like New York City. And at one point, he came in contact with Carlo Gambino and Angelo Bruno, which we'll get into that ridiculous story. He would also say that at one point, when he was involved with Local 170, Angelo Bruno would make him, quote, a liaison between the local and the Philadelphia crime family. So Bruno, I guess, takes a liking to Natale, according to Natale. Remember, I want to make this very clear. A lot of this comes from Ralph Natale directly. And this show is about either corroborating what we know and what we don't know and putting some holes into the story that Ralph Natale tells. Because there's one thing we can glean from Ralph Natale. He is very hard to believe in his various interviews that he did, in the book that he wrote. So again, this is kind of trying to put into question some of the wild, outlandish things he says. But again, this is not what I'm telling you. This is what Ralph Natale is telling you. Now, Natale, according to himself, by the mid 70s, had been involved in various murders, including himself alongside a person called Joseph McGreal, whacking an Irish gangster called George Feeney in 1970 for what Natale would say was insulting both himself and Angelo Bruno. Natale would also say that he committed the murder of Joseph McGreal in 1973. After McGreal goes to prison, Natale takes over his businesses. McGreal gets out and feels that he's owed something and that he wants his businesses back. So Natale just gets rid of him instead. Which, again, if true, would make sense. But again, we don't know exactly what to believe. I do, though, believe that he was likely involved in the hit on George Feeney. Natale would say, though, that down the road, this would become and make him a member of the Philadelphia Mafia. Now, I am going to go in to the very outlandish and ridiculous tale that Natale tells about how he was made and who made him. According to Natale, in Manhattan, the only other people that were there were Angelo Bruno and Carlo Gambino, who can be seen here. This was in 1964. Gambino and Bruno are at a restaurant called House of Chan. It's raided by the FBI. Various gangsters are there, and both them are involved in that raid. According to Natale, he claims that personally, Carlo Gambino and Angelo Bruno made him in a warehouse. Just them. They were the only witnesses to this, and that they handpicked him to become a mobster. Natale would say that Carlo told him, quote, "You belong to me and Ange." and that he became a personal member of the family. Though what doesn't make sense about this is, was he a member of the Gambino crime family or was he a member of Philadelphia? Bizarre. It was like he was this like special mobster, and the only people he answered to were Angelo Bruno and Carlo. And I guess he did various things in both cities. I don't buy this. I don't think anybody buys this. In fact, I think it's very clear that Mr. Natale was never a made member of the mafia until the 90s, which he personally says he was made under a certain person, which I'll talk about. So, again, very hard to believe the stories that are coming from Mr. Natale. Look, one of the key things you can tell on whether someone's lying in this genre, people like Natale, is when they only talk about things that happen when other people involved are not around anymore. So they can't corroborate anything. This is the super outlandish thing. It's like, look, if he says, hey, I was made in a row home in South Philadelphia and Angelo Bruno presided over it, then sure, much more believable. But when he decides to go into, oh, yeah, well, it happened in New York. I was driving for Ange, and Carlo personally made me alongside Bruno and said, you belong to me and Angelo Bruno. Just a very far-fetched story. Now, Natale moved around in everything from stolen goods to narcotics to arson for hire, etc. And by 1979, Ralph Natale screwed up. He was involved in assisting a failing businessman in an insurance scheme. Essentially, this failing businessman owned a furniture store, and he consults to Natale. Natale comes up with this harebrained scheme of, I'll set it on fire and we'll collect the insurance money. Natale gets jammed up, and in accordance with getting jammed up on that, he gets jammed up in a narcotics case, which goes hand in hand. And in 1979, he gets 12 years for the fire case and 15 years for selling narcotics. So he essentially gets 27 years in federal prison. And for the next, 20-ish years, Ralph Natale goes to prison. He's sent away. He starts serving his sentence in February of 1979. And Natale was in various prisons, including Lewisburg, Danbury, Raybrook. He also at one point goes to FCI McKean, which is obviously kind of a lot of what this episode will center around. Now, remember, between 1979 and let's just say 1989, that is a major decade in Philadelphia mafia history. From essentially when Natale goes away until the late 80s, that 10 years is tumultuous, it's violent, and all sorts of things happen. Obviously, right after Natale goes to prison, Angelo Bruno is killed in 1980. Philip Testa is taken out a year later. Nicky Scarfo takes over. Nicky Scarfo goes to war with various people, including the Riccobini faction. Various bodies drop. Nicky Scarfo then is indicted alongside his counterparts, people like Nicky the Crow Flip, Nicky's nephew, Philip Leonetti Flips. Nicky goes to prison for life. All his people go to prison for life. And all this happens, and Ralph Natale is in prison. So he, again, it's interesting to think about where Natale would have been in all this, right? Because he has claimed in interviews, and he said this in a Patrick Bet-David interview, that at one point he went to Angelo Bruno to kill Nicky Scarfo, and that Bruno shot it down. Which, again, do I believe that? Probably not. But it is interesting to think about. It's almost like if, let's just say Natale doesn't go to prison and Bruno's whacked. We know that Natale was an old school guy. He was a young guy, let's just say in the 50s. But by the 70s, 80s, he's friends with Testa. He knows Bruno. He came up under Bruno. We have to figure that, is he crazy enough to go to war with Nicky Scarfo? It's kind of messy. It is interesting to think about, because what would have been if Natale doesn't go to prison? That said, by the late 80s, he misses all that turbulent time. And look, he may have saved his own life because during that point, he probably would have been whacked because Nikki was way more powerful than Natale was because Natale had pretty much no one around him and was nothing. So it probably saved his life. Now, according to Natale, in March of 1990, and also according to Joey Merlino has verified this. In March of 1990, Ralph Natale learns that while at FCI McKean in northern Pennsylvania, not far from the New York border, not far from Erie per se, it's more of in the middle of the state. But Natale claims that he finds out that Joey Merlino is coming to McKean. And he had said that at one point in 1980, he had seen a young Joey Merlino. He didn't meet him, he didn't know him, but he had seen him at, with his uncle and his father and Nicky Scarfo, and he had known who he was. Now, according to Natale, on or around March 15th, 1990, Joey Merlino is transferred to McKean. Joey's serving a sentence for that armored car heist. Natale would say, shortly after I came there, I was only there a few months, Joey Merlino and a person called John Berkery came. Now, John Berkery is a member of the K&A gang up in Kensington. He was an Irish mobster. I guess he and Natale knew each other, likely through the fact that Natale was involved in METH, which that's very documented. Natale had involved in that his entire life in the mob. So he knew Berkery. Berkery was an old friend of mine, Natale says. They came up on, I think, the same bus. And when I saw Merlino's name on the list, because we always get a full list of who's coming in, I asked our unit manager to try and get that young man over here, meaning Merlino. He's from Philadelphia. I'd like to have him in our unit, which he did. We ended up bunking together. Now, according to Natale, others at that facility included a member of the Genovese family called Joseph Gatto, Gambino heavyweight Michael Mickey Boy Paradiso, the Cavalcanti mobster Frank Polizzi, Joey the Clown Lombardo, and Vincent Zappola, who was a Lucchese-made member. Now, according to Natale, their first conversations involving him and Merlino were related to Nicky Scarfo, to which Natale claims, quote, first of all, he hated Nicky Scarfo. Nicky took his father down from being underboss in the family and took him down to soldier. He also talked about so-called abuses that Nicky Scarfo was talking about that he would like to do to his family. Natale would say that, quote, Merlino was upset with Nicky Scarfo and that he also confided in Natale about his supposed involvement in an attempted murder of Scarfo's son, Nicodemo Jr. Now, again, this is where I get off the boat with Natale. Look, it has been discussed that Ralph Natale and Joey Merlino were in prison together. Do I believe that maybe he had an issue with Nicky Scarfo at some point? Absolutely. And we all know that Ralph Natale hated Nicky Scarfo, so they probably confided in that. Do I think, though, look, I've never talked about the Nicky Scarfo Jr. assassination attempt, and I generally never will due to the fact that we have no idea who committed that. Now, again, some people believe that it was Joey Merlino that did that piece of work or that attempted piece of work. Natale claims that Merlino confided in him and told him that he did it, which, again, I'm not exactly buying. It just seems a bit crazy for him to do that. Now, he would also say, Natale, that according to their talks, over the next few months, they made plans to, quote, take over Philadelphia. And at one point, Natale said, remember, you and I are one. Now, it would be discussed, according to Natale, that Natale would be boss and Merlino would be under him. Now, this is where we have to give Joey Merlino ultimate credit. He is a master manipulator, and the goal in that life is to make money, have success, and not go to prison and insulate yourself from bullshit. He recognized that Natale was so drunk for power and that he felt like he earned it. We'll just make him boss in his own mind. Put him up there. He's a squirrely old guy. He'll do what he's told, and he'll take all the bullshit. And that's exactly what happened. Joey Merlino, very cagey guy, a lot smarter than we give him credit for. He recognized this guy thinks he should be the cat's meow. Everybody else was gone. F him. We'll just let him do what he wants to do. He takes all the crap, and eventually he'll get pinched, and we'll take over. So it worked out, and Ralph Natale was stupid enough to buy it. Now, once this happens, Natale claims, from his own words, he became a made member of the mafia under Merlino, which this completely goes against what Ralph Natale said, because at one point, remember, he claims he became a member of the mafia personally, inducted by Carlo Gambino and Angelo Bruno. So obviously that story was made up. I don't believe Ralph Natale was a made member of the mob until the 1990s, and Merlino was the person that made him. Or a collection of Stanfa, who was the boss at that point, and then the war ensued between the two sides. Now, once Stanfa goes away in 94, the both of them get out, Natale and Merlino. And this is where Natale claims he starts approving orders for hits. One of the hits that he approves is whacking out a person called Felix Bacino. Now, Felix Bacino was an old school guy. He was born way back in like 1918, I think. He was a really old school guy. At one point came up under, Bruno and all those guys. And really by the late 70s into the 80s, he just kind of goes along with everything. He was involved with the narcotics business, Felix Bacino, and knew Natale a long time. It was said that Bacino was trying to shake down people in South Philly that were close to Merlino. So Natale approves it. Bacino turns up dead. It's also said that Ralph Natale approved the murder of a person called James Jimmy Brooms Diodorio, who would be shot as well on the corner of 12th and Federal Streets in South Philadelphia. So again, then we would know that down the road in 93 into 94, the war with the Stanfa stuff happens. Mikey Chang is whacked. Joey Merlino takes a shot. A war ensues. Eventually, Stanfa gets picked up, and we talked about Stanfa's life here. You could check that whole story out. I'm not going to go into that. But once Stanfa goes away, there's a power vacuum at the top of the Philly mob. Joey and Ralph had planned this. Joey, like the cagey fox he is, institute Ralph by being boss in Ralph's own mind, but the true puller of strings behind the scenes and the person in Philadelphia recognized on the streets where it matters most was Joey. Joey was the guy and has been the guy forever. Now, Ralph claims at this point, no one in New York recognized Philadelphia, according to Ralph Natale, which we have heard, and various members, including Mikey Scars, has said that John Gotti did not recognize Joey Merlino. We have heard that before. So again, everything's going into plan for these two. And Joey, again, manipulates Ralph into taking all the heat. He's the guy. Now, we would know as well about this thing that ultimately the heat comes. And a lot of the weird thing, Ralph does weird things. Like he starts dating a young 20-something called Ruth Ann Secchio. Ruth Ann Secchio was, and this is something Merlino says that I never knew. Ruth Ann Secchio was a friend of Ralph Natale's daughter. And one Thanksgiving, Natale's daughter brings Ruth Ann to Thanksgiving. And at the table, Ralph starts making a play on his daughter's friend. They start dating and having a relationship. Keep in mind, Ralph Natale has a wife that he's been with for like 50 years, but he's dating this 26-year-old. And from what I understand, and we have read about, this relationship was extremely turbulent. It was like a sugar daddy type relationship where Ralph was, in his 60s, 70s. He's given her a bunch of money, puts her up in a nice home in New Jersey, in I believe somewhere in like Camden waterfront. Ralph is, having fun with her, but it was supremely turbulent. Like they were constantly fighting, and she would embarrass Ralph in front of people. Really kind of wore the pants in the relationship. Ralph was weak, you could tell. And everybody knew he was weak because Joey made him weak. He knew he was weak, and he would do what he was told. It was a very messy situation. Ultimately, though, And this is something we would also learn from Joey Merlino. Ralph Natale was up to his old tricks as well in the streets. He was behind everybody's back selling narcotics and telling Ron Previty, who was also involved, that they were involved in drug deals. Eventually, though, in June of 1998, Ralph Natale is spotted with Joey Merlino and other members of the mob in Margate, New Jersey, and he gets violated. So Ralph, in June of 1998, hit with a parole violation, and he is sent back to prison. Now, Natale, according to himself, starts getting, like normal, annoyed with the life, right? And he kind of has starting to have second thoughts. The money that is supposed to be given to his wife and girlfriend, Ruth Ann Secchio, um, is cut off. Joey Merlino stops providing money. The crew stops providing money. And Ralph is furious about this. So Natale starts thinking about what he's going to do next. Now, I want to share, according to Ralph Natale, do I think it was just about money not going to his girlfriend? No. To me, there were other things. Now, in June of 1999, Ralph Natale is also indicted on our narcotics conspiracy case as a result of talking to Ron Previty. So that was problematic too. He was facing, a long prison sentence. And look, Ralph Natale is quite old at this point. So look, was it just over his girlfriend not getting money? No, he didn't want to go to prison, right? Now, Natale says in a bizarre way, quote, once he's indicted for narcotics in 99, when I walked into that courtroom in Camden to be arraigned on that charge, I looked at my wife and three of my children. For the first time in almost 40 years, I saw what I caused them on their faces, the anxiety, the hurt. I found out I was at that time. I found out what I was at that time. And when I looked at them, I was pleading not guilty. I should have pled guilty immediately, but I still had that little last bit of Cosa Nostra in me. When I looked at them, I said, no more Cosa Nostra. I gave up almost all my life to Cosa Nostra. If I have anything left in me, I have to give it to my real family. Anything, whether it's in prison, home, wherever it is, I won't do it anymore for Cosa Nostra. Now, again, the following day, Ralph Natale reaches out to the FBI. I will say, to me, this is probably the only time where I found Ralph Natale believable. I think he probably realized, look, it was a confluence of he didn't want to go to prison, right? And the last couple of years of his life, he wanted to give back to his family. I think, again, it was more about he didn't want to go to prison, and he kind of pushed it that his family was the reason he did it. I don't really find any reason to not believe that. Again, that said, though, he did have a relationship with a 25-year-old on the side. His wife didn't mean much to him then. So, again, very hard to believe anything Natale says. But did I find him to be a little believable there? Maybe. But I just don't think he wanted to go to prison. Ultimately, Ralph Natale flips, and he becomes the first sitting mob boss. Now, again, he is recognized as the boss. Do I believe he was the true boss? No. But on what we know, he is made boss. He becomes the first mob boss to flip. And down the road, Joey Merlino would change that and truly become the first official boss. And down the road, Joey Merlino and six of his pals are indicted on various charges, including serious stuff like murder and racketeering and other things. Now, once everybody's indicted, the trial happens, and Ralph Natale in the Joey Merlino trial is painted as the star witness. Natale would spend 14 days on the stand, and he testified on various things. Various recordings were played. And look, in truth, in around 5 days, Eddie Jacobs, Joey's attorney, cross-examines Natale and destroys him, quite frankly. He rips him apart. He makes Ralph Natale out for what he is, a liar, completely impossible to believe. And remember, in the end, Ralph Natale was a scam artist. He was a drug dealer. He was a bad guy who committed a lot of atrocities in his life and spent most of his adult life in prison. A lot of the things that Natale was saying were completely not corroborated. They brought all sorts of people on the stand to hit his questionable stuff, all sorts of things. And in the end, for Joey Merlino, it worked out because yes, Joey Merlino went to prison, but he escaped and was acquitted of the most serious charges, including murder. Which, again, if he's convicted, Joey Merlino is not on YouTube. He is sitting in federal prison right now for the rest of his life because we know one thing about Merlino, he's never going to cooperate. So if he's hit on this and the jury believes Ralph Natale and guys like that, Joey's not here, though they didn't believe him. And Joey Merlino was acquitted of those serious charges. However, he is convicted of racketeering, stuff that he admits to, and is given 14 years in 2001. Now, Ralph Natale has to face his day in court because, again, he's still facing drug charges, racketeering charges. Now, according to Natale, and remember, he is an informant, so he can admit to this. According to Natale, over the course of his career, he either committed or ordered 8 murders and was involved in 4 attempted murders. Again, whether I believe that or not, who knows? This is what Ralph Natale told us. Do I believe he killed 8 people? No, I don't. Do I believe he killed someone? Probably. I mean, again, it's not like he was not a mobster. We know he was. Whether he was made or not, he was around people. We know that. That's something I think we can corroborate. Like I said, not everything Ralph Natale says is a lie. I think there's some truth to it. Do I think he whacked 8 people? No. In the end, in January of 2005, Ralph Natale was given 13 years in federal prison. He would serve a lot of his sentence and be released in 2011. He would decline witness protection, according to himself. Now, in 2017, Ralph Natale, alongside Larry McShane, would write a book called Last Don Standing. Ralph Natale would die in January of 2022 at the age of 86. Now, previous to his death several years ago, Ralph Natale did various interviews, including one with nearly 2 million views on the Patrick Bet David YouTube channel, Valuetainment. Now, this interview was very interesting, and I got to give Bet David all the credit in the world for sticking with Natale as long as he did. It was quite interesting. It was tumultuous at times. Natale lost his cool at various times. Now, in that interview, Mr. Natale had a lot to say about Leonetti, Nicky Scarfo, all sorts of people. However, he was most irritated with Joey Merlino. At one point, he would call Merlino, quote, a punk and spit on the floor. Not literally spit, but go, on the floor, which he did a lot. Like when he really hated someone, he would, on the floor, in that way he did it. Natale would also say in the interview, quote, he would beat the shit out of Merlino if he ever saw him. Now, again, he's in his 80s. There's one thing that I've learned about Natale. He was a squirrely, weird guy. And he reminds you a lot of Corrado Soprano Jr. in The Sopranos. Just not that he's not believable, just he's not really that believable. And he just says a lot of cagey, weird stuff. He's kind of a squirrely guy in his old age. But I think the thing about Natale is, I think for most of his life, he was kind of a squirrely guy. As I said, Natale would die in early 2022 at the age of 86. Now, Joey Merlino has made no secret about his feelings on Ralph Natale on his podcast, The Skinny with Joey Merlino. At one point, he would call Natale, quote, a sick fuck, a sick guy, a scammer his whole life, and a, quote, piece of shit. I strongly urge everybody to go check out that video. It's done very well on YouTube. And he tells various stories about how Natale just wasn't believable in anything he said. The thing is, Joey Merlino, as I said, in the terms of Ralph Natale, was a master manipulator. He did a good job of painting Natale for what he was, a guy he could very much bully and manipulate. In the end, though, Merlino still went to prison. But for him, like he said in his sentence of 14 years, it's better than the death penalty. And it was. If Natale was believed, Joey Merlino would not be on YouTube and he would not be hanging out like he is. He would be in federal prison. In the end, Merlino 1. Now, I do want to end this quickly with Ruth Ann Secchio. She would appear on a show called I Married a Mobster, which, again, she didn't marry anybody. She was his mistress. However, Secchio, I've learned, is a fairly interesting woman in her own right. She says today she still lives in South Philadelphia. And I will say this, Ruth Ann Secchio, if you see this video and would like to speak to me, I would love to speak to you. You can reach out to me, the Sitdown777 at gmail.com. Wouldn't it be interesting to hear from Ruth Ann Secchio? Mod own. That would be interesting. I thank everybody for listening. A little bit longer of an episode today, though. I wanted to get this entire story in. Ralph Natale, do you believe him? Do you believe anything Ralph Natale ever said? Let me know your favorite Ralph Natale lie in the comment section below. We'll see you next week here on the Sit Down.